A big thank you to Chair Benham and to Sonali Basak for moderating the discussion. Well, we next move on to a conversation with Congressman Patrick McHenry. And this is going to be moderated by Nick Timiraos from the Wall Street Journal. Congressman Patrick McHenry is the chair of the House Financial Services Committee, a very important, a very powerful committee. And he has announced he's going to be retiring at the end of this year. So let's welcome Congressman Patrick McHenry. And Nick. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you, Congressman.
Great to see you, Brianna. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. You know, when I was an undergraduate here, I wrote a column in the newspaper saying they shouldn't have an undergraduate business school, and I'm glad they didn't listen to me. And I'm further relieved that I was asked to moderate this conversation today with Chair McHenry. So, Congressman, thank you for joining us.
They must have not done the research on that.
So you and your colleagues have spent several years now drafting digital asset legislation to bring clarity to this part of the financial ecosystem. This has culminated in the House passing FIT 21, but its chances of seeing a Senate vote are uncertain. What are your expectations that we see something happen with this before the end of the year?
My expectations for Congress doing anything are low. And then specifically to this, I'm modestly higher than my default rate on this. We passed FIT 21 in July of 2023 with a bipartisan vote out of committee. My goal was to have that passed in the month of October of 2023, and that seemed like the right time. And then October 2023, House Republicans attempted to commit political suicide by throwing out our speaker, and I found myself as Speaker pro tem for 23 days. That was not in the
plan.
Not in the plan. And so by the time we got to a floor vote, we're in the spring of this year. Presidential election year, an election year, terrible time. Terrible politics on complicated policy, and this is certainly really robust new policy, both with the Agriculture Committee and the Financial Services Committee, both of us producing bipartisan votes in our committee to get to the House floor. But everything had shifted in that period of time. From where we were 2 years ago with FTX blowing up, the world of crypto blowing up, a massive amount of fraud, consumer harm, and everything else, to really a wider group of policymakers engaging here. And we produced a 2/3 majority vote in the House of Representatives, with 71 Democrats joining most Republicans, including the number 2 elected Democrat in the House, the number 3 elected Democratic leader in the House, and then this former Democratic Speaker of the House voting for FIT 21. That showed that we actually had substantial momentum. And then we've seen this enter the political landscape now with the presidential debate, with both nominees affirming positive things about market form to crypto and moving in a different direction than what this administration has moved in. And I welcome that. And I think that's an encouraging thing. I don't know if that happens this calendar year. I think there's an opportunity for it to happen in lame duck. I do, in conjunction with either an end-of-year spending package or NDAA. But if it doesn't happen this Congress, it will happen. It will happen because there is momentum in both parties for clear rules of the road and keeping pace with what Europe is doing, what Japan is doing, what Singapore is doing, and other real regulators around the country, around the world.
So you see this as a template for action in 25, even if nothing happens.
Absolutely.
In 24.
And this is part of being a policymaker, which is there are seeds that you plant that may not grow in your time frame. And I think the policy footprints that I've left in the sand, maybe somebody else's name may be on it when it gets signed into law. But I think we have a nice framework for public policy for the Financial Services Committee for the next couple of years. born out of this Congress.
So I want to step back for people in the audience who maybe aren't familiar with the legislation. What does it do? What is the basic problem that needs to be solved here? And when you talk to Sherrod Brown in the Senate, and to the extent that they oppose this, what are the objections you're hearing?
Okay, so I was trying to explain this to a group of Europeans, right? So most other countries would formulate their regulatory footprint dramatically different than we do in the United States. But we have checks and balances between states and the federal government and between three branches of government, and then we have these regulators. And we have all these different time periods as checks and balances so that we have moderating policy over the long term. And European parliaments, you go from this hard left to the hard right, to the hard left to the hard right, and it is zigzags all over the place. Our system is built to be more robust than that and evolutionary rather than revolutionary. We have a break point. We have a problem here because we have the CFTC, which you heard from a very talented, smart, both staffer on Capitol Hill and now regulator, and Chairman Benham. You have the CFTC saying, well, we see digital commodities. We have a regulatory ambit. It should be with us. And then you have Gary Gensler at the Securities Exchange Commission saying, well, what we see is securities. We always see securities, right? Which I think, frankly, that is part of being at the Securities Exchange Commission is you see everything is within your world and your desire to regulate, even if you don't have the capacity to regulate. They've shown they don't have the capacity to regulate. They can't police the fraud that's happening that is in the name of crypto or digital assets. What they have done is go after celebrities rather than actually the technologists, celebrity endorsers of stuff they don't even know anything about, which is actually a pretty great way to grab headlines, a really stupid way to be a regulator, especially a great regulator like the Securities Exchange Commission. So on Capitol Hill, we see two regulators that we created, and they're fighting. And just like any good parent, you have to step in when the kids are fighting. We've stepped in, and we have made the decision of what is a digital commodity, what is a digital security. And the key piece of FIT 21 is that decentralization is the key test. And if you're truly decentralized, you're a commodity. And if you're decentralized in name only, well, frankly, you're a security. It's not perfect for the industry, but it makes sense. You raise money through the SEC regulatory structures. We clear up some of those items. And when you become fully decentralized, you then can enter into a commodities regulatory regime and then have commodities regulations and consumer protection born out of that, which makes complete sense on something as obvious as Bitcoin, but then gives rules of the road for everything else that desires to have that decentralization as the key tenet. But frankly, the key piece of the legislation is even more basic than that. We define what is a digital asset. There is no federal law defining what is a digital asset. So for the first time, we established that. That will help consumers so we can then have law enforcement and the proper role of the courts in defending consumers' rights and around this new asset class and this new software innovation.
So you mentioned 71 Democrats supported this. Is there a path to compromise here? I remember other issues, GSE reform. If you really don't think there should be a government guarantee on MBS, then it's hard to get to a compromise. Is there a path on this to a compromise?
That's why I got 71 Democrats. That's why I got crypto skeptics that saw the failures, engaged in what I think it was an improvement in our bill. And then from where we entered the discussion, frankly, when Maxine Waters was chair of the Financial Services Committee, she started the process with oversight of crypto failures. And we have a long legislative history now with hearings and tons of hearings and feedback from members. I don't think I would have gotten the vote. I know I would not have gotten the vote of Jim Himes of Connecticut, who's chair of the Intel Committee, who has deep understanding of financial policy. I would not have gotten Jim's vote had I not compromised and listened to him. How we implement the law, the time frame, the regulatory capacities we give, the consumer protections and enhancements are all born out of listening and feedback. So what we have now is a 2/3 vote of a serious piece of regulatory policy. That is the biggest vote we've gotten for anything of real consequence out of the Financial Services or Senate Banking Committee since the financial crisis. Far higher and far more resilient and a full regulatory structure for a new asset class than something like that got close to this vote, which was S2155.
This was the rollback, partial rollback of some of the regs on
Dodd-Frank. It was such a meaningful, earth-shattering piece of legislation, they didn't even give a name to it, right? So we call it Senate Bill 2155, which tells you
That's
it was a
bad
bunch
marketing.
of terrible marketing, but it actually is representative of what this thing is. It's a grab bag of dozens of individual bills with no dramatic theme to it, but could pass muster in the Senate. This is actually contemplating a CFTC and SEC regulatory regime that is a holistic view of how you regulate digital assets, which puts us in a better position than the Japanese, puts us in a better position than the Europeans if we actually enacted this law.
So I want to save time maybe at the end for some of this on deal making, kind of the art of getting things done in Congress right now.
That's a great subject.
Since this is a conference on financial regulation, the Fed Vice Chair for Supervision, Michael Barr, put out some extensive comments last week on how the Fed plan to repropose the Basel Endgame rules. I don't know if you've had time to study what he said. What's your measure of where the Fed appears to be redirecting on the Basel proposal?
Well, I welcome it. A full reproposal is what is necessary. But let's rewind. This proposal put forward by the vice chair was not born out of economic analysis and therefore a policy shift. It was born out of a policy desire to raise the capital threshold, capital standards on a class of banks. So, okay, well, you can have your public policy discussion, but the Fed should be derived out of economic need and import, and it should be a data-driven process, not a footnote at the end. And so they have a very shabby set of economic analysis, which was justification after the fact for their policy desire. But the vice chair, I think, misunderstood the nature of the Federal Reserve, which is if the board has to answer for it, well, the board is going to review it. And if the board is going to review it, their desire is to have consensus. And if you're going to build consensus, then you should not have a public policy desire without starting with the economic facts of the situation. So I think it was flawed to begin with. I think this was, I think the vice chair thought he could move quickly and jam it in because we're in post-financial crisis politics and that the body politic would accept it. What he faced on Capitol Hill, which was shocking to me, was walking into a buzzsaw, not by Republicans, but by Democratic members of my committee, asking detailed questions about how it's going to affect financial products for their constituents. That was the linkage of this. The fact that it was not born out of economic analysis without thought to the products that are not going to be available showed that it was quite a tone-deaf offering. What I welcome now is the wider engagement of the Fed board and the firm desire to build the economic analysis before you build the justification before you have the policy result. I think that's going to make it a far less complicated proposal, but we haven't seen the details yet. It's been a lot of talk, and we know very little as a result of it. And we know, we know that there's still disagreements between regulators about the finer points of this, and we're ready to see something.
Do you think this proposal, without knowing how the elections this fall get resolved, do you think this could be something that actually survives no matter?
If you don't see a full reproposal, you will see a Congressional Review Act repeal of this. Without a reproposal, you will see this get a vote on Capitol Hill immediately. This Congress, now. And I think this would be a huge disservice to the Federal Reserve to take such a willful act without sound economic analysis. I think the independence of the Federal Reserve and their rate setting and monetary policy is hugely important. And they are a superior organization when it comes to oversight of our markets, understanding of the broader marketplace, yes. But if they take an act like this, it's shown that they're not listening at all, and Congress will have to step in. And I think it would be a pretty bad move for them to go about it without going through the full process again and getting input on a new proposal.
While we're on the subject of the Fed is probably going to cut interest rates tomorrow. It's been fairly well telegraphed.
I don't know. I've read you've written this.
Yeah. There is a debate over how much they will cut by. And some people are saying the Fed shouldn't take action now, or they should maybe do the smaller cut than the larger cut because there's an election in 7 weeks. What do you think? Do you think the Fed is interfering in politics here by cutting interest rates so close to an election?
Well, I asked Chairman Powell about this at our last hearing. And the question of politics interfering with folks that have 16-year terms, well, they're supposed to look at the long term. They should not be election cycle to election cycle. And if they're making if there's political calculus to their rate setting decision today, it is not becoming of that institution. And frankly, when I asked Powell about the politics entering their rate setting, he says, no, we will not allow that. I mean,
And you believe that?
I do. I think we have really an incredible balanced board of governors. Congress has taken one of our huge capacities and given it to the Federal Reserve. And the goal here for monetary policy is for us to have stable prices. They've missed it, obviously, on inflation, and we can get into that if you want to. But the goal here is for us to have the longer view for monetary policy rather than the 2-year cycle that I'm under as an elected official. And I think the Fed is very good when they separate themselves out from that 2-year election, 4-year election cycle and take the long view.
So you've spent some time with Chair Powell, certainly in your current capacity, but even before then, I imagine. Do you think the calls he gets from lawmakers, I mean, you have Elizabeth Warren yesterday saying they should cut 75. You have Republicans saying they shouldn't cut, former President
So the outrage
Trump.
to me is that you have politicians on the left and the right, and they say that those, for instance, if you're on the right and you say the Fed should be independent, right? Except I think right now they should do this, right? And on the left, the same. So we're not in the era where LBJ can go physically assault the Fed chair and get away with it. There was much consternation about the former president's mean tweets about rate setting at the Fed. I think senators that are trying to direct the Fed on rate policy are really demeaning their role and don't understand the proper role of the Fed. They're demeaning their role as a United States senator, but they're also, I think they've got a pretty lousy view of what the Fed should be doing.
Trump has said he thinks, he should be able to give input. Do you agree with that?
All presidents think they should give an input.
Well,
You just mentioned Senator. You mentioned one senator by name, and the rest of the other people, right? We all have opinions, right? I'm asked about what's going to happen in the next Congress. I'm like, well, I'm not going to be in the next Congress, right? Well, what do you think should happen? Well, if I was running, my opinion would be linked with some ability to act. Otherwise, I'm just like a commentator, and pretty lousy commentator. But So on this, the Fed should act in the way that the data indicates that they should act. Period.
So give Powell a letter grade here. How does he rate as a chair?
I think if he has 2 terms or 3 terms, he will be rated as one of the greats. I truly think that. What the Fed's response in the immediate aftermath of COVID, I'm not trying to tout your book, but in the immediate, he wrote a book about this.
Appreciate it.
But the Federal Reserve's response.
Good at marketing.
The Fed's response in the immediate aftermath, in the immediate striking of COVID back to market normalization, A+, extraordinary. One of the best pieces of our governmental action in COVID was the Fed, right? Second was Operation Warp Speed, which was private sector driven. But the Fed was just excellent. Now, missing it on inflation? Well, there are a lot of things that will be written about this, but the fact that Congress shoveled out money in December and then have a mass stimulus in February, you had accounts chocked full. Yes, they missed it, but Congress also was shoveling out money at an unprecedented rate. So the likelihood of them overshooting was really high in a time where Congress thought that they could do whatever they wanted on spending. So I think in the long run, how they've attacked inflation will be regarded quite highly, and I think we land in a pretty moderate place as a result of the Fed's action.
Before we turn
and his decision making.
Thank you. Before we turn to audience questions, you did mention you're leaving Congress. Why are you leaving Congress now?
20 years. I've served for 20 years. Republicans have term limits, and 6 years to lead a committee for committee chairs or ranking members. So I've served my 6 years. I've served in Congress for 20. I have young kids. I like my young kids. I like my wife. I love my wife. So a little more balance to that would be a welcome thing. And this is all pretty boring stuff, sorry. And then the final piece, which was my engagement in the House in 2023, I'm not going to surpass that next Congress. I helped my friend Kevin McCarthy in the opening week of the speakership negotiate the terms for his speakership. He did extraordinary things with a slim majority and massive Republican infighting. He called me back in to help negotiate the debt ceiling with my friend Garrett Graves. We got a 2/3 vote of the House and the Senate on raising the debt ceiling and spending cuts, the largest spending cuts package any Congress has passed in history. Still not enough. And then I led the House for 23 days. Not a fun situation, not exactly fun, but 2023 was a meaningful year for my contribution to public service. And my analysis was the moment I saw that I was not going to be better the next Congress than I was that Congress, I need to step aside. And I realized that at the end of my service as Speaker Pro Tem, that I don't think it was going to get better than 2023 for my ability to contribute and make a difference. So time to do something else. It'll be fun to figure out what that next thing is.
Indeed. Any questions from the audience? Anybody? We got one. I have another one if we don't have any more.
Students go first.
Hi, thank you for your comments and your service in the Senate.
The House, just the lowly House.
Sorry, the House. I had a question about the government spending in general. It's not really being talked about in the election.
Right.
And I know you said that some things have been cut, such as this Medicare Part D as part of the IRA. A lot of the costs have been shifted over to the insurers and to pharma. We'll yet to see how that would translate to regular everyday people. But what are some things you think government can do to get a cap on the spending?
Well, for the debt ceiling negotiations by President Biden and former President Trump, they took off, in their rhetoric, they took off the significant cost drivers of our debt and deficit from the debt ceiling negotiations. So the political realm took over this debate. So we're left with a narrow slice of the pie. And so when I got called into the debt ceiling negotiations, we had, you can argue about the exact percentage, but basically a third of it was under a third, but about a third of federal spending could we negotiate on the contours of policy. Had we touched healthcare, that is substantial cost savings, and it's cost savings to the taxpayer and to the whole market if you can put real reforms into place, driving innovation, the deployment of new technologies, and life-saving cures at a faster rate. You can save a lot of money over time. And those that are on Medicare or Medicaid get better service and better health outcomes, and the taxpayer spends less. So there are win-wins in this public policy, but it's driven out of Medicare, Medicaid, healthcare policy much more deeply, right? And we couldn't get into those items. That is work that is left to be done. The savings that we got was as a result of us capping and then ratcheting down spending. It was not dramatic. The long-term consequences of us having an effective spending freeze for the first year, an effective spending freeze for the first year and then less spending for the second year, is that over a 10-year score, that is a substantial amount of less debt that we're going to be funding. But the main work of fixing our debt and deficit will come as a holistic review of public policy with both parties at the table, and a similar situation that we were in 2023, divided government, where no party wins, no party loses, but we save money over the long term, and America's in a better shape.
Maybe we'll have to bring you out of retirement to oversee all of that. We have time for one last question.
Yes, Congressman McHenry, thank you once again. I want to shift gears here for a second because given the increasing focus on climate risk disclosure in capital markets, what is your stance on the role of government in mandating such disclosures for publicly traded companies? And also, do you believe that these requirements help investors make more informed decisions, or do they place unnecessary burdens on businesses?
I think the private sector is the driving force of disclosures around climate. And the body politic is driving climate action. Climate change is real. We certainly have to address it. We should not leave it to one government agency to mandate to only U.S. companies that are publicly traded a set of disclosures around carbon and climate. We already have climate disclosures for those that have a material impact. The climate has a material impact on their business. And so we have a great measurement of climate already because of those that are touched by carbon emissions or producing them already disclosed. So we don't need to put disclosures on this long tail that are very expensive and put us at a competitive disadvantage. So I don't think it's a proper role for the SEC. The Securities and Exchange Commission is not a climate regulator. They do not have a single climate scientist on staff, and they're trying to make measurements of which they know nothing about. So stick to your knitting, be an expert agency at what you're an expert in, and let others do this. Capitol Hill, we certainly are having the climate debate. States are having the climate debate. And what I mean by that is how public policy can have an impact and reduce carbon emissions and save the planet. That should be done by the elected branch of government. Elections should drive that, not one regulatory body.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks. Can I finish with one thing? Rena, thank you. Thank you for this program and your whole team. It's fantastic. And Mike and Robin, Psaros, thank you for your continued contribution to this institution. We benefit in the public sphere by having someone we can rely upon for I don't want to say unbiased data, but to actually be the conduit to establish what is fact. In this era, we need more folks engaged in laying down factual truths and allowing others to make debates about what to do with those inconvenient, uncomfortable facts. But thank you for this. And we, as somebody who helps to make public policy, I'm a beneficiary of your greater work. So thank you all both. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman McHenry, and thank you for your 20 years of service to the American people.